Welcome to Supernatural Saturdays here on the Bald Brad channel, where we take one day out of the week to step aside from the politics, the craziness of the world, and dive into the paranormal, the unexplained, and the supernatural. What we're going to be looking at today is UFOs, UAPs, aliens, all that fun stuff, because we just had a congressional hearing on all of that with three key witnesses that either seen UFOs, engage UFOs, or know people that have seen UFOs, engage with them, and all that fun stuff. This actually comes from the New York Post, and you have a UFO skeptic. These guys do a great job, I think, of giving a synopsis of what actually took place during the hearing, rather than us sitting down for 3 hours or more going over everything. We're going to watch it here. Hit that like and subscribe button. And the question for all of you is, do you believe in little green men? Do you believe in UFOs and aliens, all that fun stuff? Let us know in the comment section below. Let's go ahead and roll it.
Mick West, you've been a UFO skeptic that's been following the UFO stuff the last few years. You have single-handedly, through math and logic, debunked several UFO photos and videos, and you're also the author of Escaping the Rabbit Hole. History today, Mick, will go down in the history books as something truly incredible. UFO hearings in Congress. Give me your initial thoughts.
Well, I was a bit disappointed, I must say. It was being billed in various arenas as being like the great revelation that's going to end all the speculation about UFOs. And really what we heard was very little that was new. There were three witnesses: Dave Grush, Dave Fravor, and Ryan Graves.
I want to pause it here because I actually agree with this guy. I thought this was going to be a big revelation. I thought we were going to get more out of all this. All three of these men have already come out as whistleblowers, like David Grush here, who's most recent. Ryan Graves has been around for a while. He's the one that we talk a lot about, where he's engaged these spheres that are in a translucent cube or whatever. And he's the one that talks about how we're encountering these UFOs every single week off the coast of California, as well as in the Atlantic. Not every year, not every like 6 years or decade, every single week. And then Commander Fravor there is the most notable one, probably, where he's the one that engaged this Tic Tac UFO off the coast of San Diego. So the reason why I didn't watch much of the congressional hearing was I know all their stories like the back of my hand. So none of this was new to me. It might be new to some others, but all these guys have been out for years, other than maybe David Grush here.
And all of them have spoken before, Graves and Fravor, at length for several years. And they said very little that was new. It was a bit disappointing.
And, you know, for viewers who may not know, David Fravor's story was, we first heard of his story in December 2017. And his story has gotten a lot of coverage, documentaries, movies made about his story over the last 6 years. And again, Congress pulls him in and he tells the same story. Ryan Graves, we've heard his story since, I believe, 2019. And documentaries made about his story, tons of media coverage on his story. He's brought in where he tells the same story. Dave Grush, who was, did a huge interview on News Nation and spilled the beans about aliens.
I don't know how much you guys know about David Grush. I mean, his credentials are there. High intelligence official or officer, has been up at the top, has a lot of information. He's never himself witnessed anything, by the way. So there's a lot of reports early on, and we did talk about this on Supernatural Saturdays and maybe the Bald Brad show, where I stated, he's seen photos, he's seen all this evidence, and that actually came out early on, and that was shown to not necessarily be true. So this is really just kind of a secondhand account of what he's heard from other people, kind of rumors and chatter around the time. So he knows information, and he could be telling the truth. But my question for all of you is, do you think this guy's telling the truth, where he said, you know what, we're reverse engineering these craft. We've had them for decades. These private companies have them. The U.S. government has them. It's been being kept secret from you. His exact quote is, there's biologics that we've recovered from these downed craft. I don't know why you would use that term biologics. I hope they cover it here, but why would you use that term? Why don't you just say like alien life? Because biologics, if you look it up online, It could be anything from a mythological thing or just somebody that's just non-human, like an animal or a chimpanzee or a dog or something that was shot up in space and came back down. I mean, it's kind of odd, but I'm curious on what you think about this gentleman. You think he's telling the truth? I don't know anymore. At first I was really like, this guy's it. Finally, he's the one that's going to blow the lid off this thing. I just don't know anymore.
Comes in and again offered nothing new. The big headline is nothing new. Well, let's talk about evidence, because that's been the main thing that's been lacking the last 6 years is a lot of stories, a lot of photos with stories behind them, a lot of videos with stories behind them. But it's really been lacking on evidence of non-human intelligence, of aliens, of extraterrestrials.
Yeah.
So it all led up to today's hearing. There were a lot of expectations for evidence. Did you see, were you convinced, was any evidence presented?
There was almost no new evidence. Professor Avi Loeb was running the Galileo project, which is a scientific project to look for UFOs, basically, in our airspace, said a couple of days ago, we need real evidence, not what people said. And really all we've got from these hearings is what people said. David Grush is going by mostly what people told him. And then we have these eyewitness accounts of Fravor and Graves, and then they tell us that there's more information. We need to get to that real evidence.
You could tell that some of these congressional leaders were attending their UFOs 101 class. And I think a lot of people are disappointed. They thought Congress was on this the last few years, that they'd been digging, getting, classified data and evidence and information and all this stuff, and that we'd be further along than just the very, very, very basics at this point. But let's talk about the witnesses. So the big thing today was, Congress handpicked 3 witnesses to come and testify and share what they knew about a UAP and what they felt should be done. And so let's start with Ryan Graves. Ryan Graves is a former F-18 pilot whose squadron observed unidentified objects, or at least on their sensors observed off the East Coast in a training area, which I believe is a big clue. In a military training area, would constantly observe, per Graves, these objects that seem to be doing weird things like hovering in place.
I want to go back just real quick. I thought, and there's so many videos, there's so many things that you see over the course of time. I thought Ryan Graves himself encountered the UFO, but here it's saying he never saw a UFO himself. So for some reason, in the back of my mind, it's telling me that statement isn't true, but I'm going to take their word for it that he actually never has encountered a UFO himself. I'll take their word for it. But for some reason, I thought for the longest time he engaged himself a metallic sphere that was translucent cube around it or something like that, or the reverse. It was a cube with a translucent sphere around it. I thought he engaged it, but I guess not.
Seem to be doing weird things like hovering in place despite wind with no visible propulsion. What are your insights and opinions on Ryan Graves as a witness and Ryan Graves's testimony of UAP off the East Coast?
Well, Ryan Graves never actually saw a UAP. And this is something I think that gets conflated and people don't really understand what they're talking about. And when he talks about saying we saw these things every day for 2 years, what he's talking about is blips on the radar. What happened was that they upgraded their radar system. They previously had a kind of an old-fashioned radar that had this little dish that points around in the nose of the plane. And they upgraded it to this kind of flat panel one, which is much more sensitive and easier to direct in different directions. And after they replaced this radar with the newer radar, they started seeing these blips on the radar, and they originally thought that there was something wrong with the radar. Now, it may just be, and this is perhaps the leading hypothesis for what's actually going on there, is that the majority of those things were balloons. We know that the military does have a big issue with mylar balloons. And in the most recent report by Arrow, they said that nearly half of the ones that they identified were actually balloons. So definitely balloons are a problem. So the question is like, is there actually strong evidence of something amazing going on?
It can't be overstated that
The thing is with that is, okay, I 100% do agree with what he's saying, but I don't think all of them are going to be balloons, right? I mean, there's another 50% or whatever. And based on eyewitness accounts, these are sometimes going against the wind. Uh, I believe it was Ryan Graves that even commented that they're just sitting there stationary for hours. I've heard rumors, and this doesn't come from Ryan Graves. I've heard rumors and people talking about how there was a craft that just sat there for hours and hours and days without ever refueling. And regardless of how many knots the wind was, it just stayed there stationary and never moved. You'd at least move slightly, right? Or if you're a balloon, you wouldn't go against the wind. You'd be going with the wind. So I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the advancements in our radar systems definitely are going to pick up smaller objects, but it just doesn't give an answer to what those other objects are.
Graves is on the record saying he personally never saw one of these objects. And I believe what he means, even though it's completely murky still, and I don't know why it's never cleared up or asked about, is he never physically saw with his own eyes any of these objects ever. It was always a squadron member saw them, or I know someone who saw them, or etc. is where the majority of this testimony comes from. And that's been his story for years. And so why weren't any of those people?
Yeah, exactly.
The people who actually saw them, why weren't the people who actually saw these things called before Congress?
Yeah, and I think if we can't get the real evidence in terms of recordings and data and radar and things like that, the next best thing would be the first-hand witnesses.
Another thing with that I didn't really hear brought up today in today's hearing, few mentions of the Chinese spy balloon, but nobody really mentions a lot of the news that has come out based on Navy documentation and vast reporting that a lot of these objects that were described off the East Coast that Graves described, the only object that was eyes on that people saw with their eyes was a round object with a cube inside of it.
10 miles off the coast of Virginia Beach, two F-18 Super Hornets were split by a UAP. The object, described as a dark gray or a black cube inside of a clear sphere, came within 50 feet of the lead aircraft.
If you look in human-made history, if you look at what humans have made in the military, humans have made clear, transparent orbs with cubes inside of them. These are radar reflectors, radar jammers, or whatever. And there's a cube within a sphere. So humans have made something that looks like that. It goes into the air. It has a process. And then you learn that after the Chinese spy balloon, there was further reporting that there were smaller balloons, had been for a while, smaller Chinese balloons off the East Coast in this exact area that were radar jamming balloons. So you've got historical precedent.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm actually learning quite a bit from this video. I just stumbled upon it and watched maybe the first 30 seconds of it. I didn't know this. Did any of you know this? That I knew about the Chinese spy balloon, obviously we covered on the main show, but I never knew about the smaller balloons with the radar jamming devices inside. The military had those. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if that's true. But it kind of debunks Ryan Graves' story. And if they are balloons, it would almost make sense as to why they would be flying off the coast. Now, here's the thing. Why is some of the reports saying that these are going against the wind? It's just my question again. How are they hovering stationary with having no effect of wind against them?
Got, objects that were made by humans that look like what was described. And then you learn things that China had smaller spy balloons off the East Coast in this exact area. And then now we learn that China has had a spy base in Cuba for decades, if you believe the reports, for decades down.
I didn't think it was decades. I thought, because we did report on it, I thought the base was about 4 or 5 years old, that around the Trump administration, they were in the beginnings of building it or something like that. And then finally it was found out about, I don't know if I believe that for sure. The United States military just found out that there is a spy base there. I hadn't heard anything about it being decades, but these guys seem like they're actually, or have actually done their research. So I'm gonna take their word for it once again that it's been down there for decades. If that's the case, that something that close to our borders, and there's a military base there that we knew nothing about, hurts our intel community. It hurts the image of our military. I mean, the fact that a foreign adversary that wants to do harm to us is that close to our borders is freaking scary.
There, what have they
We knew
been
nothing about
flying
it.
out of there? None of that was brought up today.
Mm-hmm.
None of that was even considered today at all.
It would have been great if they kind of discuss the range of possibilities that we might be looking at. But it's possible that some of that they weren't even familiar with it, because it's like kind of the unsexy aspect of what we're talking about. It's not aliens; it's just Chinese spy balloons, which is obviously a big issue in itself. But the people who are promoting this hearing, perhaps want to promote the alien aspect rather than the Chinese aspect, and it may be also something that they've been asked not to talk about because it's something that would reveal our capabilities in detecting these particular things, and that might in fact be something that explains why no real action was taken on the cases that Grave was discussing. If it was something that was thought to be an enemy thing, like you wouldn't actually see the action that is being taken. There would be action, but it would be top secret, and Graves himself wouldn't actually know about it. The pilots wouldn't know about what was being done in terms of countermeasures. I think.
I don't know, man, because when you're flying these jets, and you're having these balloons flying in training airspace, of which these pilots know nothing about, that's a huge issue. And that's kind of what was brought up during the hearing with Commander Fravor of, hey, if we were to test, say, some technology that the rest of the military doesn't know, would you do that in training airspace? He said, no, you have your own airspace to do that. You go train that there. Why would you have every single day these jamming radar devices in our own airspace? And if it is from a foreign adversary, say China, and we know clearly if a freaking journalist can bring this up, I would imagine our United States military could bring it up, then why would you allow that to happen? And why would you not bring those devices down so that we don't come within 50 feet of hitting one of these? And now you just ruined a $22 million craft on the taxpayer dime. I don't know. It makes sense, but then it doesn't make sense, just like the rest of this whole UAP UFO thing.
Probably most of what they were seeing on the East Coast was just normal airborne clutter, but it's certainly possible that some of that might be Chinese balloons or drones trying to test out our airspace.
Let's move on to David Grush. David Grush made headlines 2 months ago going on News Nation, which has become America's UFO channel, with a jaw-dropping story and allegations that the U.S. government has a top secret, uber secret team that recovers crashed non-human UFOs, that non-human intelligence bodies were inside these UFOs, that people have been killed to keep it a secret, that the alien.
My issue is he never actually said we recovered aliens, like extraterrestrial beings. As to why he didn't just say that, that's the one thing that's weird. And this doesn't just come from me. I've been watching kind of a lot of videos on what people's opinions are in the UFO community about David Grush. His story sounds really great. We want to believe it. We want to believe that there's UFOs out there, some advanced civilization or technology that could sit there and provide us with the same technology that can enhance our civilization as well. Why would you just not say that there's extraterrestrial aliens that are not of this world or planet? Like, why are you being so weird with your language? That's what bugs me the most, is if you're a whistleblower, you want to be as specific as you could possibly be. I don't understand as to is the word extraterrestrial or that there's aliens that you've gathered, is that like classified? Like, how wouldn't you be giving up classified information then that it's non-human too? Like, couldn't you just use those words interchangeably? I don't know. Am I making sense here? I feel like I might be not making sense, but if somebody were to ask me, hey man, are there aliens, extraterrestrial beings that are not from our world? Could you just not answer the question by saying, hey, yeah, these are extraterrestrial beings, aliens, these UFOs, the things you've seen on TV, these are exactly what we've recovered from these craft. Rather than saying biologics or non-human. Again, a lot of people think the non-human aspect is other countries just sending up animals like the Russians did with the dog, and that when you're recovering whatever's coming back down from the skies, that's what you're recovering. Chimpanzees, apes, whatever scientific research being done. That's kind of what the other part of the UFO community is saying.
Aliens themselves have been killing humans, a whole bunch of stuff. And so he was, dead center in today's hearing. What did you think of his testimony and what he had to say?
Yeah, I mean, this whole hearing, I think, was triggered by his initial claims, and really, people did want to hear what he had to say. I wanted to hear what he had to say, but he didn't say anything new that I can really think of that was actually significant. He basically repeated some of the same claims, perhaps in less detail than he had before, but in nearly every interesting question, like he was asked things like, have we made contact with aliens? And he would say that he can't talk about this. He can talk about it in a secure setting.
I can't discuss that in an open session.
Over and over again, that was his answer.
I do know a lot of that information, but that's something I can't discuss publicly. I can't discuss that publicly. Once again, I can't discuss that publicly.
So it was very disappointing. It was originally billed, I think, as being this great hearing where we would have all these witnesses coming forward. The people that David Grush had talked to, who had told him these things, were going to be subpoenaed and brought in, and they would tell us all about where the bodies were and which hangar these flying saucers are in, and where's this giant one that's in another country somewhere. But we didn't. We just got David Grush himself and these two other pilots that we've been hearing from for years. And then David Grush just repeats essentially everything that he'd said before and says that anything else I'm going to have to tell you in a secure setting. Sure. So it kind of kicked the can down the road. And, hopefully...
As is tradition here.
Indeed.
He states this in his opening.
Well, I think a part of it, too, is to finally get, I don't want to say conversation starter in our Congress, because that conversation has already begun. But I think we finally have representatives on both sides of the aisle that actually want to take this a little bit more serious. Folks, even Chuck Schumer's like, hey, in the Senate going, oh, okay, let's try to at least grab a hold of this thing. And I tend to trust Representative Luna from Florida a lot. I think she does a lot of great things. She's a very smart, very beautiful woman. So I'm hoping that they come down to getting to specifics here on bringing these guys into skiffs and then actually going forward with subpoenas and bringing people in and getting more information on this. And then hopefully from that, we can actually declassify a lot of this, which is what the Senate's trying to do. So I think this is to bring awareness, make a big spectacle of it, and then from there, continue to make a spectacle of it and get more information on this and seeing the seriousness of what's going on. So I partly agree with them. I partly don't. What do you guys think about this? That's what I want to know. That's what I'm curious on. That's why we do this, baby. We're a community. I don't want to be in here alone. So let me know in the comment section and live chat. What do you guys think?
Statement, and reiterates this because he's asked about it, is he didn't physically firsthand see any of this stuff. He says in his statement that a lot of this information was given to him through second, third parties. And he considers those people to be legitimate. And so he considers what they have to say to be real. And no names were named. He wasn't really asked to name any names for the most part. So it's still this big question mark. And as you said, it's disappointing because we thought these answers were coming today. They didn't come today. Get the people who saw the alien bodies in the seats with their hand raised saying, I swear, I
agree with that. But at the same time, there's such a stigma around this. I don't see people wanting to ruin their career by coming out and talking about UFOs and little green men. And some of these people, according to Grush, still work in our military and they're terrified about coming out. This is also echoed by every UFO person. For example, Dr. Greer as well says the same thing. I didn't expect him to come out and give us specific locations and names. Like, why would you do that as a whistleblower? Why would you throw somebody else under the bus to push this. I understand we all want to know, but I didn't expect locations and stuff like that. I expect all that stuff to be given to our representatives in Congress in a skiff or behind closed doors, which is normal from these types of hearings. I don't know if these guys are from the United States or not, but the hearing was very a traditional type of congressional hearing where, again, you just open up the conversation and you get more information behind the scenes with those people present, which David Grush was asked, hey, can you give us these locations and these names? And he said, yes. And the lady goes, well, when can you give it to us? And he goes, right after this briefing. So my guess is Congress already has the locations of where these craft are at, these facilities of where maybe these alien beings are at, and the names as well, to where they could subpoena some of these people, not necessarily to be talking in front of Congress, but maybe behind closed doors.
Those people, it just seemed like a missed opportunity. Another thing that struck me was there were basically no critical questions asked from congressional leaders. There were no digging, insightful, real questions. Did you get that impression as well?
Yeah, but I think that's because they don't really understand the situation. We saw from the people like running the show, Burchett and Luna, they didn't really have a good grasp on the details, and the other people there, a lot of them seem to be learning about it for the first time. And whenever you get to a question that was actually kind of getting to the meat of the matter, Grush would just say that he couldn't answer that question. So even when we did have some somewhat skeptical questions, I think from Eric Burleson had a few, he wasn't able to get any answers.
Everyone's heard the Tic Tac story, or at least they think they've heard the Tic Tac story and they know the basics, but the key thing is this, and no one asks about this, no one knows about this, and it seems like the media and Congress just don't care, is that he says, and he reiterated today, Mick, that his encounter with the Tic Tac was 5 minutes, a five-minute encounter.
What we saw with 4 sets of eyes over a 5-minute period, still, there's nothing, we have nothing close to it. It was amazing to see.
The pilot of the plane next to him was Alex Dietrich. Alex Dietrich was his wing person, essentially. She says the whole thing lasted 10 seconds. Her testimony is that it lasted 10 seconds, and she scoffs at the idea of it being 5 minutes, and that's just silly. And so you've got 2 witnesses basically right there in the same area, and they can't, one says it lasted 5 minutes, one says it lasted 10 seconds. That's a huge discrepancy where the two.
Here's the thing is you could have a discrepancy in stories, but talk about the same story. Depending on when Fravor's talking about the whole thing beginning, you could find this and spot this on radar, say, or get some sort of information and then head to the location where the thing is at, get visual for 8 to 10 seconds, and then move on. The problem with that is Fravors talked about how he not only saw this thing, but then he started to engage it rather quickly and kind of doing a spiral, and the thing was falling at the same time. I'm not a fighter pilot, so I don't know if it was engage, fly, start doing the maneuver, and then, 8-10 seconds, boom, the thing took off. That could very well be the case. Fravor could be just talking about the entire encounter lasted 5 minutes, and she's saying, well, we only saw it really for probably 8 to 10 seconds, and the entire encounter of us getting there, engaging it, and then, leaving or whatever could have lasted about 5 minutes. That's all I'm saying here. And, these guys are skeptics, so they're going to poke holes in it, and I appreciate that. That's why we're watching this, because this is what Supernatural Saturdays is all about, exploring the paranormal, the unexplained, and the supernatural. We can't always just go with what we believe. You want to hear the skeptics out that create, honestly, really good conversation starters, or at least make you think a little bit.
2 main witnesses can't even agree on the basics about this Tic Tac encounter, but it's never brought up. It's never asked about.
No, it's kind of.
I never knew that, by the way, the whole 10 to 10 seconds things. I've never heard of that. I've heard her story, but I've actually never heard that specific detail.
I've hand waved away again. You said, oh, maybe it's just like a misunderstanding or time dilation or something like that. But you can't really hand wave away of 10 seconds versus 5 minutes.
A lot of folks today, Burchett, Fravor, Graves mentioned it. A few others mentioned it, that the genesis of either their personal interest or the general interest in the public and Congress goes back to the 2017 New York Times front page article on the Pentagon's UFO program, ATIP. Multiple times this was brought up today.
A groundbreaking 2017 New York Times report.
2017 New York Times.
Like many others, in 2017, I saw the New York Times article.
From New York Times article, and I would encourage everybody to read that.
And that was just shocking to me because through my reporting, we've demonstrated that that article was factually inaccurate, deceptive. That story is mostly false and wrong. And to hear congressional leaders, witnesses, everyone still saying it all goes back to this article shows me that people still haven't caught up to what's really going on in the story. People just don't know the facts, the basic facts about what's going on. Were you shocked to hear?
If you guys are interested, I'm down to actually check that video out and see what this guy has to say about the article. Look, I saw Lou Elizondo there, the journalist, one of the guys that's on Skinwalker Ranch, that's on the History Channel, I believe it is. I might just do it regardless because I'm just curious now on him trying to debunk this thing.
Do you continue to be shocked to hear about the 2017 New York Times article?
No, unfortunately not, because it's something that just comes up all the time as being, essentially like a red pill moment for people. It was for Grush himself. Like he got interested in UFOs starting with that particular thing. And so many people have told me that, that was, their introduction to what was going on. They read the New York Times story, and so they get sucked in because of that. And this New York Times story is just given it the kind of authority of, the New York Times said this.
The program was Skinwalker Ranch. It was OSAP. It was Robert Bigelow and people chasing dino beavers and werewolves. And Leslie Kane, a UFO activist, took the story, threw OSAP away, threw Skinwalker away, and made it just about UFOs, which got to her credit, got the attention of Congress. The problem being most of the story was wrong. And that's not an opinion. It's wrong. The story is absolutely a wrong, false story. And we heard today, congressional leaders and the witnesses saying that article continues to be their inspiration. It continues to push the issue further in Congress. And none of them are aware of the fact that the story is riddled with unimpeachable errors. The public isn't aware of this. The media isn't aware of this. And I guarantee you Congress isn't aware of this. But David Grush is, without a doubt, linked to Skinwalker Ranch ghost hunters.
Yeah.
Jay Stratton dates back to 2007 at least when it comes to interest in Skinwalker Ranch. Stratton, who was Grush.
Okay, so this actually answered one of the questions. You might have saw my reaction to where he said that David Grush started really looking into or was inspired by the New York Times article from 2017. What was going on through my mind there was, well, if this guy's been in the military for quite some time, wouldn't he already know about UFOs and all these things with all the conversations that he's been having? Well, if you look down there, that last bullet point brought David Grush into the UAPTF in 2019, which would have been obviously 2 years after, a year and a half after. So I find that fascinating. It kind of removes that prior thinking that I had of like, well, that sounds sus, but this makes sense now in terms of David Grush receiving a lot of this information within the last, 5 years.
His boss at the UAP task force claims that he's haunted by ghosts and werewolves and believes in this kind of weird multi-dimensional pseudo-psychic kind of reality to this phenomena. Grush is linked to Eric Davis, who just 3 years ago, almost word for word, claimed the exact same thing that Grush is claiming to the New York Times. You could go read the New York Times right now. Eric Davis says off-world vehicles, not from this earth. The government's retrieving the crashes, all this stuff. Eric Davis is a longtime Skinwalker Ranch ghost hunter, claims ghosts spoke to him telepathically. It's still, I don't think Congress even knows. I don't think they know that Skinwalker ghost hunters were charge of the Pentagon's UAP task force for years. I don't think they realize this. I don't think they even know about this yet.
No, I don't. I agree, and it's probably something the Pentagon is a little bit embarrassed about. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure if you ask Kirkpatrick about it, he'll roll his eyes because it's kind of the bane of his existence that he's got this kind of legacy of poor investigation that went before him.
Right.
But yeah, it's very much a real thing, and it continues to be with Travis Taylor and Stratton working on Skinwalker Ranch now, which is just so bizarre.
And there's a photo of Grush at a UFO conference from last year. He's sitting at a table with George Knapp, with Jay Stratton, with Travis Taylor. Those three other guys that I mentioned, deeply involved with Skinwalker Ranch, deeply involved with dubious claims of just the craziest stuff ever, have never presented any evidence, but none of this context was brought up, looked into, thought of as relevant, perhaps. I mean, we heard Jay Stratton's name, but almost just kind of like a throwaway today. Why wasn't Jay Stratton there? He was in charge of the UAP task force. He was the guy asking David Grush to go do these things. He was the boss. Why? I mean, he's retired. He's appearing on History Channel shows. Just call him to Washington, D.C. Were you surprised to not see people like Jay Stratton, Lou Elizondo there? Not to.
Yeah, I mean, I Jay Stratton would have been one of my number one picks to be there because he was the head of the UAP task force. He was for a while Grush's boss. He had Title 50 and Title 10 clearance, which meant he could ask anybody anything and make them tell him things. He would have been able to get the exact same information and probably more information because he was more senior than Grush. And so he's someone who probably knows about these claims and about where the hangars are that have these craft in allegedly.
Again, David Grush says he knows these hangars as well. If you looked at the hearing, right behind Grush and Commander Fravor was Jeremy Corbell, which is kind of the mentee of George Knapp. And George Knapp, who's the mentor of Jeremy Corbell, was also sitting literally right behind David Grush and Ryan Graves. So they were there. These people are all connected in some way, shape, or form. So I wouldn't imagine that, those names that these gentlemen are bringing up aren't part of the conversation. And who's to say that Congress isn't having a conversation with these gentlemen on the side? Maybe these are just the select few that got brought forward to kind of, again, get this conversation going and bringing stuff in. I'm not fully believing this, folks. I'm just trying to figure out the truth and the answers. Again, this is all about an adventure. In the same way we look at the ghost videos, trying to see, okay, what the heck's going on here? Can we debunk it? Kind of like these gentlemen are doing. Just figure out what the heck is going on. That's all we're doing here.
But yeah, he wasn't called. And it's a bit strange. I mean, why is that? I mean, you bring up Skinwalker Ranch. He appears on the Skinwalker Ranch TV show now. It's this very weird thing because, as you know, like going back to the 90s, Skinwalker Ranch is kind of the root of a lot of what we're seeing right now. Skinwalker Ranch was this haunted ranch that inspired the creation of the ORSAP program by Harry Reid back then. And,
hey, you're stealing my lines. Those are my lines, Mick.
I know you're the expert here. You've got this wonderful series of videos explaining it to people, which I recommend everybody watch. But part of the problem there is that people's eyes glaze over when you start talking about it.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. You mentioned it the other night to Chris Cuomo. Yeah, I saw it. You were like, hey, a lot of this is linked to Skinwalker Ranch and OSAP, and Chris Cuomo was like,
yeah, and it's not just because it's unfamiliar to them. It's that when you start looking into it, it's like, oh, that can't be real. This is obviously nonsense. But it's not. It's true. It's not true in the sense that there's actual werewolves, but it's true that these people believed it, and it's true that the foundation of ORSAP is actually Skinwalker Ranch and ghosts and things like that.
Right,
and that reverberates to this day.
Right, and it's such. When you have the context, when you're informed, if the public had the context of here's what the Skinwalker Ranch investigators like Stratton, like Davis believe in, non-human intelligence, multi-dimensional beings traveling in between dimensions, spacecraft, but not just that, but UFOs that are linked to ghosts and that they're coming out of portals and all of these things. And then when you listen to what Grush is claiming and that he's heard this from certain people, and that that some of these certain people are skinwalker people, all of that begins to click. Oh, okay, I kind of see what's happening here. But the fact that that's not looked into, brought up, or asked about at all at this point is pretty silly. And perhaps you have a point, that it just sounds so ridiculous
Yeah.
that it's outright, denied.
I think it's difficult for people to bring up to their colleagues in Congress, because you start talking to somebody about Skinwalker Ranch and how these people believed in ghosts, they're going to look at you kind of weird.
I'm actually really glad that I stumbled upon this video, because it creates more questions for me to seek out and to pursue. That Steven guy I've actually seen before, because I did watch a video a while ago, many months ago. I don't think we did it on the show here. I think I just watched it in my living room or whatever. He went on Skinwalker Ranch to get a tour and kind of be on the ranch for a few days. I think it was a multi kind of investigation that he was doing. I think I just ended off on one episode to where he was going to camp out in one of the houses that were rumored to have paranormal activity or whatever. So I want to revisit this for these next coming Supernatural Saturdays. Look at Stephen Greenstreet's videos of debunking and kind of figure out what's going on, because he made a really good point there at the end. But it also creates a very good point that Marco Rubio came up with of Stephen here, the guy that's on the right-hand side of your screen. You heard him state of, all these people are part of Skinwalker Ranch. They believe in werewolves, they believe in ghosts, paranormal, multi-dimension beings, craft, and all these stuff, portals. Is that if David Grush is linked to all these people like George Knapp and all the Skinwalker Ranch guys, his boss was part of, ATIP or UAP or whatever it was, then he makes a good point of, well, if all your information is just coming from other people and you never actually seen anything yourself, then it could just be BS. He made a very, very good point there at the end and kind of put a nice bow on it. I want to believe these gentlemen, especially Commander Fravor and Ryan Graves, who are actually military personnel that engage these things, more so, I guess, on Commander Fravor's side, since we just found out that Ryan Graves, I guess, never actually saw one of these things. Again, just not primary evidence, just coming from somebody else. But Marco Rubio makes a very great point. He said, look, if we have these aircraft in our airspace and over our military installations that are engaging some of our craft or creating a hostile environment for us to do our trainings or doing other things, then that's a massive issue for our military personnel. But if we have high intelligence officers and military personnel like Ryan Graves, like Commander Fravor, like David Grush, that have the highest clearances, and David Grush's boss in our military, that are saying all these crazy things that aren't true, then clearly there's a huge psychological problem to this, that our freaking intelligence officers have all this access to all our information and they're cuckoo. So either way, you got to look into it. And one thing I just don't like is that these gentlemen here, rightfully so, are debunking it. I don't have a problem with that, but they're making it seem like, this is a stupid thing that we shouldn't really look into. Now, did that really come out full blown? No, I might be reading it wrong, but it almost seemed like, this is kind of wacky. All these guys are linked to Skinwalker Ranch and all these other things. Well, again, Marco Rubio has two great points to look into it. Either it's legit and we got to get to the bottom line of it, or it's crazy and we got to get to the bottom line of it because these guys are military personnel at the highest freaking levels with our information, and they're kind of off the reservation. So I think we just unlocked a big deep dive here. We might be taking a step back from the not UFOs, the paranormal stuff for a bit here, folks, and dive into this a little bit more to figure out what the heck's going on. I hope you enjoyed Supernatural Saturdays. Again, folks, it's one day out of the week to step aside from the politics and craziness of the world and dive into the paranormal, the unexplained, and the supernatural. It is an adventure. I find it fascinating. I hope you enjoy these types of videos. Hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Think about becoming a member of the Bald Brad Show. We are a conservative commentary show that provides information on breaking news, world news, culture, finance, all that fun stuff. That's Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We'd love to have you. Again, it's for conservative Republicans, but heck, if you're a Democrat, independent, we would love to have you. And on the left, you are American. With that being said, I'll see you tomorrow here on the Bald Brad Show.